Welcome to Two Truths, where we explore controversial topics in religion, philosophy, and history from at least two different perspectives. I'm Dr. Darren Yamarino, and today we're going to be talking about Asherah, looking at forgotten wives, perhaps, in the biblical tradition. And this is likely to be a two-parter, with the second part focusing on Lilith. But for today, we're going to be asking this question: is Asherah God's wife, a goddess, or merely a symbol associated with Yahweh, or both? So just to basically give you the synopsis right up front, the short version seems to be that Asherah is definitely a goddess early on, sort of Bronze Age period. As you move into the Iron Age, still seemingly so, a goddess, and will get linked, at least most likely, that might not be the case, but most likely, gets linked with Yahweh as his consort. And as more time goes on and you reach the period of the exile, basically vanishes more and more from memory, and possibly returns, if you will, in Proverbs under the guise of wisdom as a female personification of wisdom that you get in Proverbs. So that's kind of the condensed short version. Let's break this down and look at the different options. Let's start with this whole idea of both Asherah being a goddess and also being somehow Yahweh's wife or consort. Is that true? How did it happen? If so. Now, to be blunt, the scholarly opinion is very divided on every single thing we're going to touch on, whether it's all the individual pieces of evidence or these major claims. You almost can cut it right down the middle in terms of, half the scholars are on this side and half on the other side. But it does seem like there's a little bit more weight on the side of, yes, Asherah is a goddess and is pretty clearly the consort of the Canaanite high god El. And then, as the Bible itself more or less explains, you're going to have Yahweh subsuming or taking over a lot of these qualities from the high god El. And it's a natural assumption from that Yahweh would also take on the female consort that El had, which, according to the Ugaritic texts and other things, is pretty clearly Asherah, or under the guise or name, in this case, of Asherah. So that part does seem pretty well established, but again, a good amount of scholarship will disagree with this claim that somehow we can just take El's consort and graft it on to Yahweh. But again, when you start to bring in all the other pieces of evidence from the archaeological record, for example, that we're going to get into here, it does seem probable. At least it's definitely possible, but bordering on probable. Let's look at a quote from the Bible to sort of kick us off here. This is often cited, Genesis 49:25. And here you have an interesting account that's basically seems to be referencing blessings coming from not just a God the Father figure, but a mother figure or a consort figure. So let's look at this. The God of your fathers, who helps you, and Shaddai, who blesses you, with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breast and womb. So it seems like what you have here is this like acceptance early on and pairing of having a male god and female consort and receiving blessings related from like both parallel isn't that unusual. And why would it be? Because if you look in, essentially, if we're looking at Mesopotamia or we're looking at Egypt, pretty much any of these neighboring earlier polytheistic cultures, you almost always have like the male god and the female consort of any of these various gods. So not unusual to have something like that. And we know from the Ugaritic texts that were found in the 20th century that, yes, here are sort of the three main goddesses, and this particular goddess is going to be linked with El. Okay? So that's one quote from the Bible that's frequently discussed in relationship to sort of the role of goddess in this early Israelite religion, right? Now, there are a whole bunch of other places that are going to be like referencing 40, give or take. It's not abundantly clear because you might be like, well, is it 40? Is it 42? What's the deal? It's not abundantly clear because it's not obvious if we're talking about Asherah as a goddess or if we're talking about Asherah as this cultic symbol, which might just be something that has become associated with Yahweh. Okay? So keep that in your mind because we're going to be getting into that in a little bit more detail. But let's look at a couple more quotes here. This one is something that's often brought up, but questioned in terms of the historical accuracy by scholars. So let's look at this from 1 Kings 18:19. Now, summon all Israel to join me at Mount Carmel, together with the 450 prophets of Baal, and the 400 prophets of Asherah, who eat at Jezebel's table. So this is the whole King Ahab and Jezebel, who are these, sort of dangerous, evil, malign figures, whatever, that you hear about in the Bible. Now, what actual evidence is there that they're, worshiping Asherah in addition to Baal? Okay, supposedly they set up temples and whatnot in the northern kingdom of Israel at this time to both of them. And the sort of claim here is that, Jezebel is coming from what would today be Lebanon, like Tyrian, Phoenician coastal towns, okay? And they do worship, Baal there. And it's theophorics. It's in the name, in people's names. It's even in her dad's name. Jezebel's dad's name. It's in her name, Baal. So that is seemingly like the real concern. There's no doubt in the scholarship that there's like a rivalry between Yahweh and Baal. They have similar attributes and all that, okay? So, fine, that is happening, but is it the case that Asherah should even be mentioned in there or not? Is it a later gloss to the text? That's sort of where the scholarship will, diverge. And we don't really have any good textual evidence to make the claim that in these sort of like Tyrian history or any text that they're worshiping Asherah at this time in the 9th century BC. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it's actually about Astarte. So that's the other kind of problematic issue here is like, where does one goddess kind of begin and the functions and attributes of another start or end? A lot of the time you get a pretty confusing bleed through, to be honest, in the archaeological record. If you were to say like, hey, what are the symbols that are associated with Asherah versus Anat versus, Astarte or Ishtar, I mean, are some of these the same or not? It's difficult, and that further complicates our problem here. Okay, now some other good references that we could look at. One more. This is coming from 2 Kings 23:4. Sort of jumping in the middle of it here. Bring out of the temple of God all the objects made for Baal and Asherah and all the host of heaven. Now see here, it seems pretty obvious that we're talking about a goddess, not just the occult symbol, because you have Asherah sort of like sandwiched in between Baal and the host of heaven. And that is a reference to deities. So it'd be kind of weird that you have like a deity, then deities at the end, and then like some cultic object only in the middle, not a goddess. So long story short, there's pretty good reason to accept that Asherah is a goddess. It's probably, just extending from the Bronze Age concept, and as you move into the Iron Age, still there, still sort of prevalent in say like 10th, 9th century. But then it becomes slowly but surely like less clear. And yes, maybe then we are moving into a period of like, it's more of like a cultic symbol, or people don't know exactly what they're even referencing when they're talking about it. So let's do that. Let's make the transition now. Let's talk about this cultic symbol and the Asherah poles that you hear so much about in the Bible. Now, let's go chronologically and look at the archaeological record. First up, 13th century BCE, so pretty far back. We have in Lachish, you've got this Lachish ewer, it's called, basically a decorative large jug, okay? And on it, we have some intriguing imagery and writing where you have a stylized tree with two sort of like ibexes one on either side, okay? And above it on one of these, on one line here, one register, it says offering to my lady, Elat. And this is believed to essentially be, a reference here to the goddess and possibly linked to Asherah and all of this. Certainly the stylized tree image is definitely associated with Asherah and possibly some of these other goddesses in the surrounding regions. In fact, I'll even pull up something here. This is from my personal collection. I'm putting up this imagery that's probably from about the 10th century BC, and you can pretty clearly see the exact same sort of imagery that they're talking about on this jug, right? With the two different ibexes on either side of some stylized tree. Okay, very common imagery associated with the goddess, along with multi-pointed 7-8 point sort of star. That might come up in relationship to say Ishtar or something like this. But the tree is always there. The tree, or like a sort of like pubic triangle, which tells you right away, I mean, this is something to do with fertility, right? That's going to be a big piece. And we'll get into more of that in a few minutes. But let's keep with our like timeline here on the archaeology. So, all right, you have the Lachish ewer in the 13th century BCE. Then 10th century BCE, you have this sort of like cultic stand in Ta'anach, and this is a fascinating multi-tiered object that definitely has the stylized tree on one of the layers again. I'll bring it up so you can see it. It's not abundantly clear though, unfortunately, what's going on like the lowest level of this stand and the very top. It would be helpful, certainly, if we could figure that out, but it's very open for interpretation. But what's kind of not and is obvious is that you have this stylized tree imagery once again, right? Now, that's 10th century, right? Fast forward to what's arguably the most well-known and famous, these Kuntilat Ajrud imagery that's in sort of northeastern Sinai Peninsula, okay? And this is around 800 BCE. And you can also see some other images of this too in the Yahweh video that I also posted, because this is very relevant to Yahweh as well, since he is mentioned by name multiple times. And importantly, it says where he's from, like Yahweh of Samaria or Yahweh of Teman, two different places than the north and south where he'd be worshipped. So helpful for dating too, because this is like, okay, this is before where you still have two states, two kingdoms. So here you have, right, this pretty unfortunate, seems kind of rudimentary, right, drawing that seems to show Yahweh and possibly Asherah. Again, the the scholarship is split about if this is even really referencing her. Some of the scholarship's going to say that it's Egyptian here. It's like the god Bes, and then Beset, the female version, does certainly look somewhat like that, but again, also looks and shares enough similarities to how you might even have God shown in like the Edomite kingdom and stuff. So I don't know. I don't think we're going to be able to tell for sure just off of like the figures themselves. And unfortunately, the text isn't that much more help either, because there's disagreement about interpretation of various lines. Like, again, are we talking about an actual goddess here, or are we talking about Yahweh and his cultic sort of object or whatever that's associated with him? It's not abundantly clear. So it does seem, though, that we've now learned for sure that it's a male figure and what definitely seems like a female figure. So again, very possible that it's sort of a representation of Yahweh and Asherah, but not for sure. Now, next on the timeline, interesting. Approximate dates, 750 BCE. And we have in Khirbet el-Kham in the West Bank, you have these interesting tombs with a magic hand symbol and inscriptions to basically people that, again, have a theophoric name with Yahweh in it. And there's this interesting line where it says, by his Asherah, he has saved him. Okay, so once again, I don't know, are we referencing a goddess, or are we referencing some sort of cultic symbol? That part isn't abundantly clear. But what is interesting here is the dating, if you will. It doesn't state Yahweh of, Samaria or Teman or anything like that. It just says, Yahweh, and then talks about Asherah and whatever that is. And scholars have suggested that this might, help date it, because at this point, if you've had the fall of the Northern Kingdom, there's no other, it's just Yahweh of one state, right? So there's no point in referencing, Yahweh of blank sort of deal. So that's another intriguing they're all intriguing like breadcrumbs, right? Sadly, there's no like smoking gun, right? That's just going to be like, There's no way to deny that type of thing, right? Now, if we continue on, there are a lot of female goddess type figurines in like household situations. So I think, we have to accept the reality. The Bible's, it's pretty clear that like, if you go throughout the Hebrew Bible / Old Testament, okay, then it's constant disappointment. The people are not worshiping, right? They're worshiping Baal and these Asherah poles and other foreign gods, right? And it's a disaster. And God and Yahweh is pissed, type sort of thing, right? So there are a ton of these female goddess figurines, and probably an Astarte, cult. Who knows though? I mean, when you're representing the goddess, any sort of goddess, it's not too shocking to represent a female with like breasts and cupping breasts, which is a very sort of classic image you get in a lot of these terracotta figurines, of which we have many examples of these. So what does that tell us? It tells us for sure that there might be the religion as it's being expressed sort of with the monarchy or in more of like the state politics and all this, or the temple, and then there's what the average people, right, are doing. And their daily religious practice can look very different from what sort of like the official state-sponsored sanctioned version of a religion is. That's no different than today. It doesn't matter if we were talking about Catholicism or, certain forms of Buddhism or anything. It doesn't matter. There can kind of be this like pretty large disconnect, right, between those sort of levels of society. Right? One last piece of sort of interest here before we move on to our next sort of tier. This is something that I think is kind of intriguing. You don't really hear any discussion of like, well, what does Islam have to say? What does that religious tradition have to say about any of this? And one thing that kind of might be an intriguing tie-in here to also my prior video with Yahweh is that when discussing the Midianites, which is where Yahweh is presumably from originally, okay, in sort of like the south, but like northwest Saudi Arabia, approximately. So the Midianites, this group that's out there that Moses ends up with, right? Within Islam, there's going to be this belief that somehow these people, the Midianites, worshipped a sacred tree and are kind of known as people of the wood. A bit weird, given the location of where they're supposed to be. Perhaps this is because by the time Islam, comes about, and maybe there's already all these associations relating in confusion, linking Yahweh and Asherah poles, and who knows? I mean, I don't have much to say there other than just to point out that it's not something I typically have seen or heard discussed. So just to throw something kind of new into the mix. But be that as it may, let's shift gears and talk about Asherah. Since this is two truths, let's look at not really the focus on Asherah as a goddess, but as a cultic symbol that's somehow just associated or linked to the God Yahweh, right? Now, well, if that's the case, well, what is it? Type of deal. And the Bible doesn't give us a whole lot. I mean, it seems like it could be a tree, like an actual living tree, and some have suggested that. Bit odd if you had a full-on living tree, especially because there's even references of like not to put them underneath other trees or something. So like you'd have like a tree under a tree. I can't remember exactly what that is in like Deuteronomy 16 something. I don't want to misquote it, but so it's definitely, there's some sort of wooden pole, but if you think about it just being like a staff, that seems pretty bare bones, right? It does seem far more likely that they had some sort of maybe like tiered thing, hence like a stylized tree like you get in these older representations. I mean, what's the point? What's really the function of this? Is it just that the people are trying to link maternal sort of symbolism and functions onto Yahweh, but eradicating the need for a goddess, especially as we get closer and closer to true monotheism? Maybe. Yeah. So it's worth looking at, like, what's the function here and purpose of this cultic object? It has to be fertility, healing, and some form of general blessings. I mean, that seems to be all that we can really say for sure. And since the tree or pole, right, is the primary symbol here, we have to look at the symbolism, right? With that, trees give fruit, right? And then also, since I mentioned all the other female goddess figures, the only other way you might really represent it in more of an anthropomorphic way would be like breasts giving milk, right? So either way, we're clearly talking about fertility. Now, if we move from the obvious fertility function to more of a general healing function, there's some intriguing suggestions that maybe it's that you could put like clothes on it. Now, clothes like on like an actual idol, perhaps. But if you think about it as being more of like this somewhat stylized but still maybe abstract tree type situation, you can imagine putting like smaller pieces of clothing or cloth for the magical purpose of healing, perhaps. We're moving into like total speculation, okay, here now, because the texts don't really help us that much, all right? Yeah, there's going to be incense, no doubt. There's going to be libations or some sort of water pouring out. Those are pretty standard when coming to any like ritual situation at this time. But I do think that it could be, total speculation again, that maybe some people are trying to use some of these sort of Asherah poles on these high places and things like that, where more of like the common people are congregating, okay? They could be using them for enchantments is one thing, like some form of like magical incantations that they're writing and putting on the tree, maybe for fertility purposes and for healing purposes type of magic. And so that's viewed as being a slippery slope and dangerous, perhaps. Maybe they're doing that. Again, not saying that they are doing that because we don't have enough evidence. It could be that you even would write the spell on some form of cloth and then you might put it in water and then water near around the stylized tree. That is a fairly common thing to take a spell, if you will, or some sort of written statement of will or desire, maybe, right? And putting it into water, and this sort of homeopathic type reaction occurs where your desire is transferred into the water, and then maybe the water is poured out. Even in the Bible, we have a totally different context, but when trying to essentially ascertain if like your wife or something's been cheating on you and like having them drink these water that's got like dirt from the tent of meeting or whatever in it and text stuck in it, or in Egypt, these Horus stelas or the Sippis where you've got a stone representation and a bunch of magical symbols on it, and you pour water over it, and then you drink the water, or you place the water on maybe a snake bite, scorpion sting, something like that. That's pretty common overall magic of that time period. So maybe, right? I don't know. Speculation. They could be doing something like that. And that's getting in the way of more official, right? Like the official way that the religion should be performed, okay, in this time period. Sticking with the magic piece, okay, maybe enchantment for healing, something like that. We do actually have evidence later on during a Roman period where they do actually have, they're putting pieces of clothing and stuff on this like tree that's associated with the goddess Venus, and also with the Virgin Mary. So, I mean, it's not totally out of the realm of possibility. But to jump to divination instead of enchantment, divination, like it or not, you might think, oh, that doesn't really happen that much in the Bible. Yeah, it's everywhere in all the neighboring cultures. All of them, literally all, right, are doing this. You constantly want to try to discern what the gods or goddesses, right, want for you in some major situation that might be occurring, okay? You don't have the luxury of having a temple all the time too, right, to be able to figure it out. So you're kind of on your own at times. If you're in like the priesthood, say, and within the Hebrew Bible, think about the stones, the Urim and Thummim. These are in the priestly like garments and stuff. And they might be some sort of like binary oracle where it's like a yes, no sort of thing. If you pick one stone or the other and you ask the question, these binary oracles are simple and pretty common. Or it could be that it's something that you actually have to like look through or even cast down and maybe a shadow comes through. It's not abundantly clear, but stones are being used for divination. And there seems to be some evidence to suggest that, okay, there's stones being used and those are associated with God, the father, the male, right, component. The goddess is associated with wood, okay, and a tree. Maybe there's people doing divination with somehow with sticks or like a staff or whatever. And we do find some intriguing evidence of this. For example, right, in Hosea 4:12, you get this interesting statement. My people consult a piece of wood, and their divining rod gives them oracles. So, that's an intriguing situation. And how would you do that? Well, how do you even use a piece of wood or multiple pieces of wood? A bunch of different ways. One would be called rhabdomancy, and you could like stack many sticks on top of one another, and then you can release them and see the way they fall. And that could tell you, for example, like the direction that we physically need to go on some journey or something like that, as one example. Another more common example would actually be bellomancy. This is like using arrows, but they're made of wooden, right? Shaft. So this is in the Bible too, to like pull arrows that might have kind of like a yes, no, again, it could be like kind of this binary type thing, or they could have other type of complicated messages that could be created by pulling or casting arrows, lots or something onto the ground. This happens even in pre-Islamic Arabia. They're doing this, and it's not that uncommon. In the Bible, again, here's another quote from Ezekiel 21:21. For the king of Babylon stands at the parting of the way, at the fork in the two roads. To use divination, he shakes the arrows, he consults the teraphim, he inspects the liver. That literally tells us right there in one quote that not only are you going to consult sort of some form of divination, I mean, hey, you should probably consult 3, right? because if you have a major decision, you don't know whether to go right or left, let's say, you might not want to just trust pulling an arrow out that tells you, yeah, you should go that way. You should maybe consult it against another, like 2 forms that can corroborate the first oracle. And it's not exactly clear what teraphim are, maybe like some form of idols, perhaps. It's, again, not totally clear. Inspecting the liver, very common, especially in like Mesopotamia. That's super common way and to do divination. There's like texts and specialists on just doing that. So it's a huge, huge deal. Plenty of other examples in the Bible. If we wanted to look into divination, which is not our primary focus. I'm only bringing that up because, again, we're talking about Asherah as a symbol, and like, well, what's the problem? Why is the Bible so against it? What's really going on with these things? Is it really because there's a simple just like pole and that's an idol, functioning as an idol, and so they don't like it? Or is it because people are like doing things with it and asking things of it, which seems more probable? I mean, we already know you can get blessings from like kind of the male, right, father, and from the female side of things. And if we're moving towards monotheism, we're probably going to want to take that out, right? And that is what happens. So you have these reforms with Josiah, and they're going to strip things out of the temple. And that's where we actually get our other great references in the Bible to Asherah and sort of cultic imagery associated with her. So that's when it's over, supposedly. And anything that remains of sort of that like important female element that we want to keep in the religion has to somehow become much more subtle and abstract, okay? And that takes us to our final little component here, which has been proposed by more recent scholarship that maybe in the book of Proverbs, where wisdom was definitely female, okay, that wisdom is quite possibly a way of keeping this Asherah like tradition, but toning it down significantly. And in fact, you do see that in the book of Proverbs, wisdom is described in association with the tree of life 3 separate times, which is interesting, and also associated with blessings. So that right there is pretty fascinating and could be something worth exploring more with the scholarship. Although I will say that other scholars have disagreed with this interpretation and pointed out that, such as like Proverbs 8:22, wisdom is God's first creation. It's more of like a daughter rather than the idea of being like kind of a consort sort of situation. But it's still, I think, it's intriguing as a possibility, and would kind of give us a nice little narrative here where if we go Bronze Age, if we go way far back, yes, this is a goddess, okay, that we're talking about. Then we get into Iron Age, and it's kind of like, yeah, it probably is still like a goddess, but maybe you shouldn't be worshiping her in the same way people did in the past. And then we continue on our timeline, and it's like, oh, well, no, you can't do that at all. So we have to have these reforms, and we have true monotheism now. And okay, here's this remnant relic that's left in the book of Proverbs. So kind of fascinating, intriguing possibility for how to wrap up all of this story. I'd love to know your thoughts. So please comment, give this video a like. I'd appreciate it. And please feel free to subscribe to the channel. The next video that's coming out is going to be on Lilith. So here in this video, we've been doing something where it's like, okay, definitely has a lot of biblical basis. And then the next one on Lilith is going to be like, well, not really so much, but how does this thing kind of start and then grow in popularity, right? So that's coming up. But until then, as we always say here, since we don't know exactly what's the truth, is it really Asherah as a goddess or just as a cultic symbol, it's probably best that we stay gray.